Hi, I'm Sue Carroll. I'm a professor at the Eagleton Institute of Politics and in the Department of Political Science, and also senior scholar at the Center for American Women in Politics here at Eagleton. I had always intended to be a teacher. I was very interested in teaching, and I taught junior high math for 1 year and decided I really had to get out of there. Not because I didn't like the students, I love the students, but I wasn't too keen on the administration and all the rules. I was never very fond of rules. Really, I was always motivated by ideas. I'm an ideas person. I find ideas interesting, and so I decided, okay, I've got to go to graduate school. I really had no idea, what professional academic life was like, other than having seen professors in the classroom. But I was interested in social change, so I decided I would go into political science, because if you wanted to change the world, politics seemed to be a good way to do that. When I first entered graduate school in political science, it just seemed obvious to me that there were no women. There were very few women in my class. There were no women for the most part, in the literature I was reading. There were no women evident in politics, and so the interest in women in politics just seemed obvious to me, but wasn't so obvious to anyone else at the time. My very first semester in graduate school, I took a course on Congress, and I was the only woman in a class of about 17. And I went to the professor. We had to do a research paper. I went to the professor and I said, I really want to study women in Congress. I want to do a research paper on women in Congress. And he said, no, you can't do that. There aren't enough. You don't have a big enough N. You don't have enough number of cases. And I wasn't savvy enough at the time or confident enough to say, but I could look at why there aren't any more women in Congress. Why aren't they there? And really that became the question that has driven much of my academic career. There really was no subject in those days in terms of women in politics. We kind of here at the Center for American Women in Politics and a few of us who were scholars at the time invented in a way that subject. I've always been interested, from the very beginning, and really in questions of surrounding women in office, how to get more women into office, what it meant to have them there. And so the two questions that have really kind of shaped my work on women in those kinds of positions as candidates and office holders are really the question of the descriptive representation question of why aren't there more women in office, and also the substantive representation of what difference does it make once they're there. Those are the central questions really that much of the work at the Center for American Women in Politics is focused on. I also have done work over the years on the voter side of electoral politics. I've been very interested in the development of the gender gap in voting, which of course developed back or during, and then we discovered it really in the aftermath of the 1980 presidential election. It's really issue-based, but it's become rooted in women's partisan identification now as well. Looking at the gender gap strategically is the next thing on my agenda. How the gender gap has been deployed politically, how it's been used, by the women's movement, by candidates, by presidential administrations, and how it's been used by the right, how it's been used by the left, and how it's been counteracted in certain kinds of ways. So I'm interested in the strategies that have evolved around the gender gap and how it's played out in terms of campaigns, especially presidential campaigns. And I've just started the work going back to 1980, and it's interesting because some of the strategies that were evident then are still evident today.